Alright, so this is going to be our supply curve side of the house from our supply and demand curve shifts and determinants. So jumping right into this, we gotta briefly mention the law of supply whenever we're talking about supply curves. This is the fact that as quantity rises, so the number or the amount, so does the price. And remember, whenever you're determining between a supply curve and a demand curve, a supply curve will always slope upwards. Alright, talking about our line shifts. So we have a couple of relationships here. The more product that's supplied, the more you're going to have an outward shift of the supply curve, which means your line on the graph will shift to the right. When you have less product that's supplied or less supply, it's going to be an inward shift of your supply curve, which means it's a left shift of the line on your graph. Willingness to supply is a big part of the supply piece of economics. So maybe a company is able to afford making more of a product, but they don't want to, they're not willing to for a variety of reasons. So let's look at our little scenario right here. Number one, price of hamburgers rises, hot dogs remain the same. Number two, businesses will make more profit by selling burgers, right? They're more expensive and the price rose, therefore when they sell them, there's more profit. So what is the business going to do in that situation? Number three, the business makes more burgers. So whenever the price is higher for them, from a business mindset, they're going to make more profit. You have to remember all the demand stuff that we've been talking about in demand curves. You're always looking from the consumer's point of view. They're wanting to get a sale. You don't want to spend more money than you have to. But in this case, we're looking at everything from the business side of the house, where you want higher prices when you sell because that means you get more profit. And at the bottom, just to recap, higher prices equals more profit, and companies are more willing to supply, which means you're going to have a shift in your line. Ability to supply. So when you have a higher price, like that hamburger example, you're going to have more profit. Once you have more profit or more money in the bank for the business, you can actually afford to purchase the supplies and machinery and hire the people to make more of that product. Now, this does depend on the cost of supplies that are needed. If the price of the item increased by $5, but the cost of the supplies to create the product also increased by $5, then your net increase is going to be zero. They cancel each other out. Therefore, the ability of the supplier or the company to supply more of that product would be the same. You wouldn't see a shift there. Higher prices means more profit, more money for companies. So the companies are more willing to supply and you get that line shift. If they have more profit and they're willing and able, then you'll have that line shift. All right, determinants of supply. So these are super important because, again, we're trying to determine what's a shift in supply and what is a shift in quantity supply. The first one is number of sellers in the market right here. So that is talking about competition, and number of sellers is talking about other businesses. So am I the only company in the entire world that's selling this product? Or do I have 20 other companies I'm competing against? That's going to completely change the market. Who else is selling this product or service? If there's a lot of competition out there, I'm really going to have to make sure that my price points, my selling prices, are really competitive. If my, let's say I'm making shoes and my shoes are $100 more expensive for the same style compared to another company, then they're going to probably pick the other company. Level of technology in production. So if you added new machines into your production line, or if you're having to create computer or technology parts, those kind of go together. If you have new machinery, new technology, new, then typically it's going to be more efficient and it's going to be faster with your production without really having to tax your workers anymore, make them work longer hours or work harder. And even things like pest-resistant seeds, that's going to help more crops grow. So that's a technology that is employed in the farming and ag industry, but that also helps them have a bigger crop, which equals more production and more profit. All right, process of production. So The cost of supplies, again, if those change, that's going to impact the price that it sells for. If you are, again, making shoes, then you're probably going to have to buy things like thread and fabric, and rubber, etc. You have to pay your workers, right? And their conditions matter too. So that production, you're including everything from the materials to actually make the product, to the machines, to the workers that you have to pay, to the building that you're in. You have to pay taxes on that building and your income. You have to have gas, electricity, lights, all this stuff. And then weather also impacts the cost of supplies. So if there is a natural disaster, let's say a big fire that burns down a lot of trees, then you would have less supply with the same number of companies demanding that tree or that resource or that material. So that impacts the prices of production. These go up, then the price of the company selling the product is going to go up. All right, government involvement. If they have taxes and regulations, that will affect supply as well. And it can go either way. It can help or hurt a company, but if it is impacting the company enough, it'll create a shift in the supply. Prices of other similar goods. So if it's priced too high or too low, that will impact the demand really just because of other similar products. Here, an easy example is the one I use a lot, Dr. Pepper, Pepsi, Sprite, Coke, all that stuff. They're all similar goods, but if you'll notice, similar goods like that are all priced just about the same because they don't want to mess with demand. Really, they're just looking at supply at this point. And expectations among producers of future prices. So, do your competitors also think that there's going to be an increase or decrease? It's almost like Wall Street here. You're trying to take a guess, what's going to happen next year. 2020, nobody expected that, right? A couple years ago, no one would have even imagined that. And now that's changing expectations for companies, and they're trying to change and adapt to their supply lines based on that and what's happened. Productivity. This is a huge one. So if the business is closed, like quarantine, weekends, holidays, whatever, if no one's working, none of the product is being produced. So it makes sense that they're not being productive because they're not producing any more of the product. The second one, workers go on strike or vacation. So maybe the business is still open, it's not closed, but the workers aren't there. If you have all of your workers going on strike, that means they're refusing to work due to some sort of issue or working condition that's unsatisfactory, not enough pay, whatever. So workers going on strike will impact their productivity because, again, you're not making anything. Or if a few workers are out on vacation days and they're not there, you're still paying them because it's a paid vacation day. However, the amount of shoes, let's say, that they could have produced in a day will be taken away from the company, basically. If you have broken machines, computers, etc., that's going to slow down the process. You have to wait for things to get repaired. You have to pay for parts, repairmen, etc. So that's slowing down productivity as well. And then the last one is lack of new supplies. So if I tell you, here is this many yards of fabric and this many pounds of rubber, I want you to make shoes for 8 hours. Well, if you run out of materials in the first 2 hours, for the rest of your time until you hit the 8-hour mark, what are you going to be doing? If there's no supplies, or if there's a lack of new supplies, then you're going to be sitting there waiting. Again, it's almost like you might as well be on strike or vacation or half the business being closed. If you don't have enough supplies, it's going to impact that productivity. And remember, all of these are determinants of supply. So change in supply. This is kind of similar to the demand shifts on the chart. Just remember that anything that is supply has an upward slope, not a downward slope. Make sure you always pay attention to that. The original line will be S or S1, and then the change will be S2. So a shift in supply is going to be a non-price determinant. So something other than changing the price caused this shift. It could be the higher cost of production. It could be the higher taxes with the government involved. It could be the productivity issues. Maybe the workers aren't there, or the machines are broken, or you ran out of supplies, whatever. So anything like that will cause a shift. and make sure you're paying attention to which direction it shifts. Don't forget this bottom corner of the axis here is technically 0 on your graph. So shifting inwards towards the left means it's a less supply, and then shifting outwards to the right means an increase in supply. All right, change in price of goods. That's where your quantity comes into play, and that's where you're moving along the supply curve. The line itself does not move. So how much or how many of an item is going to be on the store shelves. Whenever you have a higher point on that supply line, it's called an extension. So when you have more prices, like a higher price, you're going to supply more. Think back to that hamburger and hot dog example. The hamburgers were more expensive than the hot dogs, which means the company was focusing on making more of those hamburgers because they could make more profit. And then the exact opposite is called contraction. That is when lower prices occur, which can also cause a shift, which means less product is being supplied. So that is moving directly along the supply line. The line itself does not move. Extension and contraction are exact opposites, and this is all about the quantity shift in supply, which means it's all related to price. All right, market price is also called equilibrium point, equilibrium price, same thing. This is where the supply and demand curves intersect or cross each other, and this point can change and move around all the time because your supply and your demand lines are also changing constantly. The red arrow here is pointing at the intersection point where you have the market equilibrium point. You have your upward slope supply, your downward slope demand. Now this is a really simplistic example of your equilibrium point. This is a perfect X and nothing's moving. And remember, this equilibrium or market point is where businesses want to get their prices for their goods. So you want to have enough demand, enough people wanting your product that they're willing to pay a higher price, but you don't want to price it too high or else you're killing that demand that you wanted so bad. But if you price it too low, you're not getting much profit from that, and that really hinders your company. So it's really balancing that fine line in between supply and demand, and that's called the equilibrium point. Here's some examples. If your supply shifts left, it's an inward shift. You can see with the yellow arrow that you have the S1 moving into the S2, and the stars are showing your new equilibrium point. So your original was here, and then your new one is here. So with that leftward shift, and this is our price axis here, we have a upward trend in our points or equilibrium points. So therefore we have a higher price. And then it says the quantity demanded falls. So as we go up this demand line, just barely, you can see it moves from this line at 9 to this line at 8. So you can see how the equilibrium point will shift there, and these lines shift constantly. All right, goods price increase. So we're getting a little bit more complex here. As the demand rises, so if we have a shift in demand and it's increasing, it's going to be a shift right here with this green arrow, an outward shift on our downward sloping line. So from our D to our D2. Number 2, supply falls. That's an inward shift, which means to the left, and that's this red arrow right here. So we go from our S to our S2. And then you can see there's going to be a rise in prices. So if we're looking at these dotted lines, this is our first equilibrium point, and then our second equilibrium point on the star right here. And if you look at the dotted lines, that really visually helps you figure out what's going on here. So P1 to P2, that's price 1 to price 2. Going up and down this axis right here is changing your price. Going across down here is our quantity. So the quantity did not change. There's still the same amount of product. However, in this case, the price increased. For example, if you run out of oil, supply is going to fall, demand keeps rising, and things get more expensive. So just because you don't have as much of something doesn't mean people stop wanting it. That just means you jack up the price and make more profit. All right. Supply shift and determinants. So don't forget, just kind of a recap, whenever you have a shift of the line left and right, that's going to be your change of supply, very similar to your change of demand. And if it's not price related, it's any of your determinants. It could be competition, how many other sellers are in the market. It could be production costs. That rubber to make shoes, how much is that costing me right now? The government being involved with taxes and things can impact supply. Technology, productivity, which is anything from your workers to your business being closed physically to machinery and things. So all those things can cause a change of supply. And in real life, truly, multiple determinants are constantly impacting your company all at the same time. So these lines are shifting second by second. And then the bottom part is where you move along the existing line of your supply curve. This is a change of quantity supply. Just like your demand curve and demand quantity, it's all related to price. So the price is unchanged, but the numbers of goods supplies changes. So the price is fine, but the number or the quantity has changed. All right, and that wraps up our supply curve and determinants.